Welcome everyone to another video discussion of answer writing program by Vajiram and Ravi. I have an announcement for you guys that for 2023-24 answer writing program is going to end at the end of the month of March. We are very honored to have you with us. We have learned a lot and we are very overwhelmed for the comments and love that you have showed for the program. We will be continuing again post prelims so that we can understand the entire answer writing program in depth. You can see the kind of comments that we have received and we are very honored and we are learning to make sure that we provide you the best possible video discussion and strategies for answer writing practice. So let us start with today's session. Today we are going to see GS1 Indian Geography. Let us see the overview of those questions. We are going to see three questions. The first question is with respect to the concept of land subsidence, how it is different from landslide, and we are going to see what are the kind of measures that can be implemented to address the impacts of land subsidence. The second question is with respect to the coastal erosion. We are going to see what are the different factors and we will understand the impacts along with the measures to ensure that coastal erosion is curbed. And lastly, we are going to see question with respect to air pollution in Delhi. We are going to see what are the factors and suggestions for the same. So let us start with the very first question. Let's read the question together. Explain the concept of land subsidence and its distinction from landslides. Discuss the measures that can be implemented to address the impacts of land subsidence. So if you see this question, you can structure the answer with the introduction where you can mention the definition of land subsidence as it is the direct demand. Also, you can provide certain context where you can give certain current affairs related article over here. In the body aspect, the very first demand that we are going to tackle is going to be the distinction between land subsidence and landslide. And the second demand we are going to tackle is with respect to the measures that are there to implement and therefore address the impact of the land subsidence. So this is the structure for introduction and body, and in conclusion you can provide some way ahead points. So let us start with the introduction. In the introduction, you can define land subsidence. It is a gradual setting or sudden sinking of Earth's surface. You can also provide certain current affair based articles like we have seen that how in India we have witnessed land subsidence in the regions such as Joshimath of Uttarakhand. So these are the kind of current affair articles that you can integrate in your introduction. Let us move on to the body. In the body, the heading 1 is going to be the difference between land subsidence and landslide as it is the direct demand of the question. Over here, you can create a table to provide clear distinction about the land subsidence and landslide. Firstly, you can start with the definition where land subsidence refers to the gradual and sudden sinking of the Earth's surface, whereas the landslide refers to downward slope movement of the earth material due to effect of gravity. Second, you can talk about what are the different kind of origins, as in it can be because of extraction of oil, water, natural gas, about land subsidence, and it can be also natural events such as earthquake, soil compaction, erosion and sinkhole formation. With respect to the landslide, again it is with respect to the gravity where natural and man-made reasons can be there. Now this is a vertical movement downwards with respect to land subsidence, whereas for landslide it can be both vertical as well as horizontal movement. And lastly, we can talk about the area where land subsidence can happen over large areas or smaller ones in a slower process, whereas the landslide typically occurs on steep slopes and can be triggered suddenly. So this is the kind of distinction you can provide for the heading 1 of the body. For the heading 2, you have to provide various solutions to reduce the land subsidence crisis, which is the direct demand of the question. Over here, you can start with deep soil mixing. Over here, we are talking about reinforcing soil to prevent compression and land subsidence. Second is with respect to artificial recharge. We have seen that how extraction of water can play a crucial role with respect to land subsidence. So, as a preventive measure, we can recharge aquifers, reducing pumping and thereby subsidence. Next, we can talk about alternative constructions using of lightweight material to minimize subsidence risk. Apart from that, we can also use tactical textiles to ensure that the land is not prone to subsidence. Then we can talk about ground improvement where weak soil can be strengthened to enhance the stability. Next is afforestation where we can have certain planting of trees to stabilize the slopes and prevent erosion. Next, we can talk about controlled drainage, where we are managing water flow to prevent soil sagging, and lastly, planning and zoning to avoid subsidence prone areas in construction planning. So this is the kind of heading 2 for the body you can provide here. Let's move on to the conclusion. Now in the conclusion, again you can talk that land subsidence definitely impact not just the nature but also human activities, and thereby going ahead there should be better planning and regulation of the construction project, regulation of mining activities. There should be also early warning system to ensure we safeguard the lives of the human as well as other living beings. And next we can talk about disaster preparedness plans to ensure that any kind of disaster is managed well. And lastly, we can talk about community-based disaster management to ensure there is localized solution for the same. So this is the kind of conclusion you can provide for question number 1. Let us move on to the model answer and understand how can we inculcate the same in our answer writing practice. In the introduction, you can give context with respect to the land subsidence, talk about recent disaster at certain region. Next, you can give definition of the same. In the heading 1 of the body, you can provide the difference between land subsidence and landslide and provide the proof points. In the heading 2, you can provide various solutions along with proof point, and lastly, in the conclusion, you can provide way ahead points. So this is all for question number 1. Let us move on to question number 2. Let's read the question number 2 together. 1/3 of India's coastline is vulnerable to coastal erosion. In this context, discuss the factors that cause coastal erosion. Also enumerate its impact and highlight measures taken by the government in this regard. So if you break down this question, you will understand that this question specific theme is with respect to coastal erosion. We have to talk about the factors that are causing the coastal erosion, and we have to also list down impact and measures taken by the government with respect to the same. So if we structure the answer in the introduction, you can provide context, you can give certain data points also with respect to the coastal erosion. And in the body, you can start with factors. As there are 3 demands, you have to create the structure of the body in similar fashion. In the heading 2, you can talk about the impact. And in the heading 3, you can talk about the measures. And lastly, in the conclusion, again, you have the opportunity to provide certain way-headed points or integrate certain government initiatives with how exactly coastal erosion has been resolved. Now, when you have 3 demands for the body, you can reduce the number of dimensions for each heading. When we are talking about a 10-marker question, in the body, it's ideally perceived that we should write around 8 to 9 dimensions. If there are 2 headings, we divide the same, as in 4 for each. Now we have 3 headings, you can write 3 dimensions for each headings. So that's how you structure the answer. Let's start with the introduction. In the introduction, you can provide the context. You can talk about it, how 1/3 of the India's coastline is vulnerable to erosion. You can also talk about it how in the parliament we have seen that we have understood that 34% of the India's coastline has been going through erosion for the last almost 30 years. So this is the kind of data and context you can provide for the introduction. Let us move to the body with heading 1, where we can talk about the factors. Now with respect to coastal erosion, there are 2 types of factors. There are natural factors and anthropogenic factors. You can list down the different factors in the same fashion in a tabular manner. Firstly, in natural factors, we have waves, cyclones, storm surges, and thermal expansion of seawater. We also have littoral drift resulting in sand movement. We also have sea level rise, which again impacts the coastal region through wave energy. Then saturation of soil and decreased soil strength due to heavy precipitation. And lastly, you can talk about the tidal current. This is with respect to the natural factors. With respect to the anthropogenic factor, you can talk about the unplanned structures. You can talk about reduction of sediment supply due to damming of river. You can talk about removal of sands from beaches, dredging of inlet channels, and lastly, unplanned reclamation. So these are the kind of factors that we have seen for coastal erosion, both natural and anthropogenic. Let us move on to the next heading of the body, which is going to be the impact. Now impact, you can list down 3 to 4 dimensions along with substantiation. Firstly, we have ecological degradation. We have seen that how there are certain environmental degradation happening, such as coral reef deterioration, mangrove loss, and wetland disappearance, that again impacts the coastal erosion. Then we have loss of land due to sea level rise and reduced sediment delivery, causing land loss. Next is with respect to increased vulnerability, as we are looking at unplanned urbanization, which again increases the coastal erosion. Again, we can talk about pollution and how it affects the river body that brings the sediments, and how those flow are polluted with industrial, agricultural, and urban pollution. And lastly, it depletes resources. We have seen that how the marine resources are also impacted, where the economic activities are also in a way negatively impacted due to coastal erosion. So these are the impacts of coastal erosion. Let us move on to the measures that are taken by the government to prevent coastal erosion. Now that is the demand. So this is the heading 3. Now remember, you have to write 3 dimensions for each heading. So that's how you can compact the entire answer for 150 words. Firstly, you can talk about that how the government have created certain infrastructures and institutions, such as Indian National Center for Ocean Information Services. Now, such kind of initiative helps with respect to mapping to assess the sea level rise and how it impacts the coastal erosion. Then we have National Center for Sustainable Coastal Management. It focuses on the coastal resources and environment, thereby there is sustainable development. Next is with respect to integrated coastal zone management. It regulates the development and conserves the ecosystem. Next is with respect to initiatives taken by the Ministry of Earth Science, where mitigations are taken based on the certain reports and reforms carried out by NDMF and NDRF. Then lastly, we have NDMA, which creates certain kind of norms and policies to ensure that the disaster management is there with respect to the coastal erosion. So these are the kind of proof points you can write for the heading 3 of body. Let's move on to the conclusion. In conclusion, you can talk about that apart from the government initiatives, going ahead, the focus should be to ensure that the coastal erosion is curbed. At the same time, we are also taking the advantage of blue economy. Now, this is something which has been explicitly mentioned in the budget 2024. So this you have to integrate in the conclusion to ensure that the coastal erosion is also curbed. At the same time, the economic livelihood is also realized in a sustainable manner. So these are the kind of proof points you can integrate for the conclusion of question number 2. Let us move on to the model answer and understand how can you inculcate the same in our answer writing practice. Firstly, in the introduction, you can provide the context as well as data points with respect to the coastal erosion. Then in the heading 1, you can talk about the factors. You can segregate the same with respect to the natural and anthropogenic factors. Then the heading 2, you can talk about the impact of coastal erosion. You can list down the impact and provide substantiation. And lastly, in the heading 3, you can provide the measures that have been taken to prevent coastal erosion in India. List down the initiatives taken by the government, and lastly, in the conclusion, you can talk about that how going ahead there should be integration as discussed with respect to the realization of Blue Economy 2.0. So this is all for the question number 2. Let's move on to question number 3. Let's read the question together. The issue of air pollution in Delhi is much more severe as compared to other metropolitan cities in India. What are the factors responsible for such a situation? Also give suggestions to overcome this problem. Again, if we see the structure of this question, the major demand is with respect to the context of air pollution. In the body, you can talk about the factors and the suggestions, as in the measures to overcome this solution. So if you structure this answer, in the introduction, you can provide the context, as in the issue of air pollution in Delhi is much more severe as compared to other metropolitan cities. So there is a comparative kind of context that you have to provide. In the body, you can firstly talk about the factors, and in the second heading you can talk about the measures, and lastly in the conclusion you can talk about way ahead apart from the measures that you have already mentioned, or you can also talk about certain government initiative. So let's start with the introduction. You can provide certain current affairs that we have seen recently, that India's pollution is worsened, becomes third most polluted country, where Delhi remains the worst capital city in air quality. So this is something which we have seen in the current affairs that you can integrate for the introduction. Then going to the body, where the heading 1 is going to be the factors responsible for severe air pollution in Delhi. You can list down the factors such as vehicular emission. We have seen that how we have large number of vehicles in Delhi, and also we have certain vehicles which are source for higher contribution to the pollution in Delhi. Second, we have industrial emission. Now concentration of industries in and around Delhi releases pollutants like particulate matter and nitrogen oxides. Next is with respect to the construction and dust. The ongoing construction activities generates airborne dust, adding to the particulate matter pollution. Next, we have biomass burning. We have crop residue burning in the nearby states, especially during the post-harvest season, which again coincides with the peak air pollution quality index in Delhi. And lastly, we have geographical factor, as Delhi is a landlocked location, and temperature inversion that during winter trap adds to the pollution issue of Delhi. So these are the kind of factors you can inculcate for heading 1 of the body. In the heading 2, you can provide certain measures or suggestions to overcome the problem, such as improvement in public transport. Over here, we can talk about how encouragement of public transport usage can be taken. Next is with respect to strict emission norms and enforcement with respect to the vehicle and industrial pollution. Next, we can talk about promotion of clean energy, where reduced reliance on fossil fuel can be taken and renewable energy adoption can be substantiated. So that is something you can talk about for promotion of clean energy. Then we have waste management and biomass utilization. Now over here we can talk about it, how the waste and the biomass must be resolved in a sustainable manner and should not diverge towards crop burning. Next is with respect to afforestation and green spaces, that can definitely help with respect to urban green spaces which can absorb the pollutants and improve air quality. And lastly is with respect to the public awareness and behavioral change, where people can educate as well as help with respect to understanding the core issue of Delhi's air pollution. So these are the kind of proof points you can inculcate for the heading 2 of the body. Lastly, with respect to the conclusion, you can again provide certain way ahead points where you can talk about there should be reliance on certain regulatory measures, technological advancement, public participation, sustainable urban planning, and focus on clean energy. Now all this must be done in a sync to ensure that the Delhi's air pollution, which should be the focus and must be resolved in consensual way. So this is conclusion for question number 3. Let us see the model answer and understand how can we inculcate the same in our answer writing practice. Firstly, in the introduction, you can provide the context with respect to Delhi's air pollution issue. Then you can provide factors in the heading 1. In the heading 2, you can provide the suggestions. And lastly, in the conclusion, you can talk about certain way-headed points such that all the stakeholder must address this kind of problem in a consensual manner. So this is something you can talk about for question number 3. And this is all for today's answer writing practice. Keep writing and thank you so much.